Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a deeply fascinating, wide-ranging journey into the fundamental challenges of the human condition. We're going to break down an incredibly rich source text that unpacks the psychological, biological, and social structures governing our everyday lives. We'll be mapping out everything from the friction between our careers and our families to the intense biological realities of addiction, all the way down to the terrifying, yet ultimately transformative, psychological depths of the human mind. It's a brilliant framework, and I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through it. Okay, so here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with ambition versus wholeness, move into negotiating relationships and divorce, scale up to the politics of hierarchy, shift into the genetics of addiction, and finally, wrap up with looking into the abyss. Section 1. Ambition versus wholeness. The cost of the 80-hour week. So this is the very first major friction point our source outlines, and it's a big one, that intense, often unforgiving choice between a hyper-focused career and a balanced life. The argument here is that to reach absolute genius-level status in a really narrow domain, say you want to be an elite mathematician or a top-tier corporate lawyer, you basically have to build a unidimensional career. You're working 70, maybe 80 hours a week, staking absolutely everything on radical success. And while a minority of people pull this off and achieve exceptional status, it obviously comes at a massive cost, right? They often literally have no life outside of work. On the flip side, though, we have this concept of wholeness. Now, this is presented as the healthier, even if less exceptionally dominant strategy for most of us. It's the idea of taking 5 different core elements of your life, maybe family, career, friends, physical health, and hobbies, and operating all of them at about 80% capacity. You aren't giving 150% to any single one, but you end up creating a much richer, much more resilient life. Because think about it, if one pillar collapses, you don't lose your entire identity. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the speaker applies this career dynamic to men and women, specifically noting that women often bail out of those unidimensional 80-hour-a-week careers in their 30s. Presenting the source's sociobiological theory neutrally, there are a few reasons for this shift. First off, an increase in socioeconomic status just doesn't significantly boost a woman's attractiveness on the mating market in the exact same way it tends to do for a man. But second, and absolutely most critically, the biological time frame for a woman to start a family is strictly compressed. Trying to pursue a 70 or 80-hour work week while also having children is exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. And that forces a major pivot away from that single-minded career track toward a desire for overall wholeness. And honestly, this number brilliantly and kind of brutally illustrates the hard, unforgiving biological reality underpinning that shift. 1 in 3. 1 in 3 couples over the age of 30 experience fertility problems, which is defined as an inability to conceive after a year of trying. It's a really stark statistic, and it literally forces people to radically negotiate their ambition against their deeply rooted desires to build a family. Section 2. Negotiating relationships and divorce, fixing the ghost car. This difficult balancing act naturally leads us right into the incredible challenge of negotiating a shared life and the catastrophic sprawling costs of divorce. To really understand relationship breakdown, the speaker uses this absolutely striking metaphor called the ghost car. It's so evocative. The idea is, when a relationship is corrupted by enough massive mistakes, say multiple acts of infidelity, the fundamental element of trust is just gone. You can't even communicate anymore because you don't know if your partner is telling the truth. The shared reality breaks down entirely. So trying to fix a relationship at that stage, it's like trying to fix a phantom vehicle, a ghost car, while the real physical engine is sitting completely broken in the shop. You're just waving your hands in the air. It simply won't get you anywhere. So how do we actually avoid that kind of catastrophic breakdown? Well, you have to solve the problems right as they arise. The source takes the massive, complex problem of a marriage and brilliantly reduces it down to what they call the philosophy of the kitchen. Step 1, you have to negotiate who cooks and when. Step 2, decide who buys the groceries and actually puts them away. Step 3, establish exactly how to express gratitude for that work. Because traditional domestic roles have largely disappeared in modern society, running a household is unbelievably complicated now. You have to actively sit down and negotiate these granular, everyday truths. If you don't, the cost is just simmering resentment, hostility, and ultimately an incredibly unhappy marriage. But here is the good news. If you can negotiate those domestic truths, the payoff is immense. The source describes 2 brains in a functional marriage acting like a corpus callosum, that dense bridge of nerve fibers connecting the 2 hemispheres of your brain. Your partner basically becomes an essential external sounding board. They catch your blind spots, they help you make tough decisions, and they share the totally exhausting burden of raising kids. Together, your perfectly negotiated home becomes this vital, necessary buttress to protect you both against a chaotic and largely uncaring external world.
Section 3, the politics of hierarchy, navigating social structures.
Moving from the micro level of the household, let's zoom way out to the macro level of society. The source offers a really fascinating framework for how we construct our shared values and political systems. Now, impartially detailing the source's political theory here, we actually see both sides of the political spectrum represented as absolutely essential to a functioning society. On one side, you have the right wing, which advocates for hierarchies of competence. And these hierarchies are necessary, right? You need them to organize people and actually get complex things done in the world. But on the other side, the left wing serves as the essential critic of those hierarchies, correctly pointing out that hierarchies inevitably dispossess people, and they advocate for the necessary mercy to protect the vulnerable, the widows and orphans. The crucial takeaway here is that open, free speech is required to keep these two opposing sides talking, constantly balancing functional structure with necessary mercy. And this political balance ties directly into how we process reality itself. The speaker argues against the idea that we can derive our values purely from cold, hard facts. Why? Because, think about it, there's an infinite number of facts in the world, but we only have a finite number of values. We are constantly forced to reduce the infinite complexity of the world by using a dominance hierarchy of value. Basically, we filter reality based on what we are choosing to pay attention to. And what we pay attention to is established through social negotiation. It's instantiated physically in our neurology and socially in our shared world. Section 4. The genetics of addiction. The ascending curve. Let's completely shift our focus inward now, down to our biological vulnerabilities, by exploring the speaker's clinical research on alcoholism. To figure out what actually makes alcoholism hereditary, the speaker looked at physiological responses. When a standard drinker consumes multiple large drinks quickly on an empty stomach, their heart rate basically stays normal. But for individuals who are genetically predisposed to a specific type of alcoholism, their heart rate actually jumps 10 to 15 beats per minute within the first 10 minutes. For them, alcohol doesn't just intoxicate, it acts as a powerful psychostimulant, creating this massive beta-endorphin opiate rush.
And this right here is where the biological trap is set. That incredible opiate kick happens exclusively on the ascending limb of the blood alcohol curve. In those first 10 to 15 minutes, as the blood alcohol level rises, they get the intense high. But hours later, as it descends, they get the hangover, which is, biologically speaking, alcohol withdrawal. Because that opiate kick only happens on the way up, the individual is biologically driven to just drink endlessly, pounding back drinks to stay on that ascending limb until they either run out of money or the bar shuts down. To actually study this phenomenon, researchers had to find healthy sons of alcoholic fathers and artificially dose them in a lab to a really high 0.12 blood alcohol content to trigger the effect. But they ran into a pretty massive and honestly kind of funny roadblock. The source notes that ethics boards eventually stepped in and mandated that these heavily intoxicated, often 240-pound men couldn't leave the lab until their blood alcohol dropped all the way down to 0.02. As you can imagine, holding bored, irritated, heavily intoxicated guys in a small lab for 7 hours proved totally disastrous, making this vital piece of research practically impossible to continue. Section 5. Looking into the abyss, the heroic ancestor. We finally arrive at the deepest, most internal pillar of this explainer, the psychological requirement to face the ultimate terrors of life. The source outlines a really fundamental rule of clinical psychology here. When you avoid the things that frighten you, your terror actually increases, and your overall ability to achieve your goals deteriorates. But when you voluntarily take on challenges, even biting off just a little more than you can chew, you don't just get used to the fear. You actually develop new skills, you build real courage, and you undergo a literal psychophysiological transformation. Placing yourself in challenging situations turns on new genes in your nervous system, coding for new proteins and building entirely new, much stronger structures inside of your brain. So, if facing small fears makes you stronger, what happens if you face the ultimate fear? Well, this is the abyss. It is the darkest, most terrifying place a person can possibly contemplate. It's the reality of mortality, of suffering, and of malevolence. Drawing on some really classic mythological tropes, the speaker points out how Simba follows the baboon underground to look into a dark pool, or how Pinocchio dives down to the very dark bottom of the ocean to find the monster. In both of these stories, by looking deep into the abyss, they find their father. They discover the heroic ancestor nested right inside the catastrophe of life, proving that you can actually incorporate that strength and become stronger than the suffering itself. The crucial point here is perfectly captured by this old alchemical idea from Carl Jung. In store cor invenitur. In filth it will be found. It means that what you need the absolute most in your life is always going to be found in the exact place you least want to look. You literally have to look purposefully into the darkness to find the transcendent power that allows you to prevail.
Which leaves us with this final, really powerful thought. By facing the pessimism and the pure chaos of the world head-on, you don't just find darkness, you incorporate the strength of your heroic ancestors. You become whole. So looking closely at your own life, what are you currently avoiding? If you voluntarily looked into your own darkest abyss, what heroic parts of yourself might you finally discover? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.